Welcome to Bedtime Express, where we journey together into the realm of peaceful sleep and fascinating stories designed especially for grown-up minds. Tonight, we're embarking on a 3-hour voyage through time to meet one of history's greatest scientific minds, Galileo Galilei. You're about to experience a gentle exploration of the man who first turned a telescope toward the heavens and changed our understanding of the universe forever. We'll follow his journey from a curious boy in Renaissance Italy to the revolutionary moment when he discovered Jupiter's moons and opened humanity's eyes to the true majesty of the cosmos. If you enjoy this cosmic journey, please give us a gentle like, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to Bedtime Express for more soothing stories that celebrate the wonder of human discovery. Ring the notification bell to join our community of peaceful dreamers. Now, find your most comfortable position, close your eyes, and let yourself relax completely. Take a deep breath, release the concerns of the day, and prepare to drift away on a journey through time and space. Sweet dreams await you among the stars. Galileo's first look through a telescope. In the gentle hills of Pisa, where the Arno River winds like a silver ribbon through ancient stones, there once lived a boy whose eyes sparkled with endless questions. The year was 1564. And the world was a tapestry of mystery, woven with threads of wonder that only the most curious souls dared to touch. His name was Galileo Galilei, and even as a child, he possessed a mind that refused to accept simple answers to the complex dance of existence around him. The Renaissance was blooming across Italy like spring flowers after a long winter, bringing with it new ideas about art, literature, and the very nature of human knowledge itself. Young Galileo would spend countless hours lying on his back in the family's modest garden, watching clouds drift across the Tuscan sky like ships sailing on an invisible sea. The olive trees cast shifting patterns of light and shadow across his face as he contemplated the movements of the heavens above, wondering why the sun followed its predictable path each day, and why the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. Even then, there was something different about the way his mind worked. A restless quality that demanded not just to see what was there, but to understand why it had to be that way. His father, Vincenzo, was a musician and music theorist, a man who understood the mathematics hidden within melodies and the precise ratios that created harmony from chaos. From his father, Galileo inherited not just a love of learning, but an understanding that the universe itself might be written in the language of mathematics, waiting for someone brave enough to read its secrets. The Galilei household was neither wealthy nor poor, but it was rich in something far more precious than gold: intellectual curiosity. Their home was a place where ideas were welcomed like honored guests. where questions were encouraged rather than stifled, and where the pursuit of knowledge was valued above material comfort. Vincenzo's friends would gather in their small parlor on winter evenings, discussing the latest developments in music theory, mathematics, and natural philosophy. Young Galileo would listen from the shadows, absorbing conversations about the ancient Greeks who first dared to measure the earth and calculate the distance to the moon. Vincenzo would often gather his children around the hearth in the evenings, speaking of Archimedes, who shouted, "Eureka!" when he discovered the principle of displacement while bathing, and of Pythagoras, who heard music in the mathematical relationships between numbers. These tales planted seeds in young Galileo's mind that would eventually grow into a forest of revolutionary ideas. The boy's education began in the tradition of his time, with lessons in Latin, Greek, and the classical texts that formed the foundation of Renaissance learning. But where other students memorized passages from Aristotle and Ptolemy as immutable truths, Galileo found himself asking uncomfortable questions about the logic behind these ancient assertions. Why should heavy objects fall faster than light ones, as Aristotle claimed, when his own observations suggested otherwise? Why did the complex system of circles and epicycles used to explain planetary motion seem so contrived and artificial? 5. His tutors at the monastery school of Santa Maria di Vallombrosa found his persistent questioning both impressive and troublesome, for young Galileo had developed what would become his lifelong habit of asking, "But how do we know?" whenever presented with accepted wisdom. As Galileo grew older, his questions became more pointed, more challenging to the established order of things. He would conduct small experiments in secret, dropping objects of different weights from his bedroom window to test Aristotle's claims about falling bodies. He would time the swing of oil lamps hanging in churches, using the steady rhythm of his own pulse as a crude clock to measure their periods. Each small investigation yielded results that contradicted what he had been taught, building within him a growing conviction that the natural world operated according to principles that could be discovered through careful observation rather than inherited through ancient authority. Why did the pendulum in the Cathedral of Pisa swing with such perfect regularity, regardless of how wide its arc? Why did objects of different weights seem to fall at nearly the same rate when air resistance was minimal? These questions haunted his adolescent years, driving him to seek answers in direct experience rather than scholarly tradition. The medieval world of Galileo's youth was one where authority was rarely questioned, where knowledge was something to be received rather than discovered. The teachings of Aristotle, filtered through centuries of scholarly interpretation and sanctified by church doctrine, formed the foundation of all natural philosophy. The earth sat motionless at the center of creation, surrounded by crystal spheres that carried the sun, moon, planets, and stars in their eternal dance around humanity's divinely appointed home. It was a universe that made sense in human terms, a cosmos with humanity at its heart, created by God for purposes both magnificent and comprehensible. The heavens were perfect and unchanging, made of a pure substance called quintessence that was unlike anything found on the corrupt and mutable earth. Motion in the heavens was circular and uniform, reflecting the perfection of the celestial realm, while motion on earth was linear and temporary, always seeking rest as its natural state. Yet something in Galileo's spirit rebelled against this tidy picture, sensing somehow that reality might be far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had dared to imagine. When the time came for formal education, Galileo's father hoped his son would study medicine, seeing it as a practical path to financial security in a world where intellectual pursuits rarely provided adequate income. Medicine was a respected profession that offered both social status and material comfort, and Vincenzo had seen too many brilliant minds struggle in poverty while pursuing more abstract forms of knowledge. So, in 1581, the 17-year-old Galileo enrolled at the University of Pisa, intending to become a physician and fulfill his family's hopes for financial stability. But the young man's heart was not in memorizing the ancient texts of Galen and Hippocrates, with their elaborate theories about bodily humors and their reliance on philosophical reasoning rather than direct observation. Instead, he found himself drawn to the lectures on mathematics and natural philosophy, subjects that seemed to offer glimpses into the very structure of reality itself. It was during his university years that Galileo made his first significant observation, one that would later influence his understanding of motion and time in ways that neither he nor his professors could have anticipated. Sitting in the cathedral during a particularly long sermon on a feast day, his attention was captured by a lamp suspended from the ceiling, swaying gently in the draughts of air that moved through the vast space. The lamp had been disturbed by someone lighting it, and as it settled into a regular rhythm, Galileo noticed something that would have escaped the attention of most observers. Using his own pulse as a timepiece, he discovered that the lamp took the same amount of time to complete each swing, whether the arc was wide or narrow. This observation contradicted everything he had been taught about motion, for according to Aristotelian physics, the lamp should have taken longer to complete wider swings than narrow ones. Yet his careful timing revealed that the period remained constant, suggesting that there were mathematical laws governing motion that had nothing to do with the philosophical explanations offered in his textbooks. This simple observation would eventually lead to his understanding of the pendulum's properties and its application to the measurement of time, making possible the precise mechanical clocks that would revolutionize navigation and scientific observation. The discovery filled Galileo with a profound sense of wonder and excitement that would shape the rest of his life. Here was a principle of nature that could be observed, measured, and understood through careful study rather than ancient authority. The lamp's behavior followed a mathematical law that seemed to be written into the very fabric of the physical world, independent of what Aristotle or any other ancient philosopher had claimed. This moment marked the beginning of Galileo's transformation from student to scientist, from one who accepted knowledge to one who sought to discover it firsthand. He began to see the natural world not as a collection of mysterious phenomena to be explained through philosophical argument, but as a vast book written in the language of mathematics, waiting for someone with the patience and skill to decode its meaning. As his university years progressed, Galileo found himself increasingly at odds with his professors, who taught natural philosophy as a collection of established truths rather than a field for investigation. When they spoke of falling bodies, they cited Aristotle's claim that heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones, treating this assertion as beyond question or verification. When Galileo politely suggested that they might test this claim by dropping objects of different weights from the university's tower, they looked at him with a mixture of amusement and dismay. Why test what was already known? Why doubt what had been established by the greatest minds of antiquity? 5. Such questions revealed a dangerous tendency toward pride and presumption, they warned, a willingness to elevate human reason above divine authority and ancient wisdom. But Galileo could not stop himself from testing, from questioning, from seeking to understand the world through direct observation rather than received wisdom. He conducted his famous experiments with falling bodies, though perhaps not from the Leaning Tower of Pisa, as legend suggests, but more likely from other high places around the city, where he could make careful observations without attracting too much attention from his disapproving professors. What he discovered contradicted Aristotle completely. Objects fell at the same rate regardless of their weight when air resistance was minimal. A heavy stone and a light piece of wood, dropped simultaneously from the same height, would strike the ground at nearly the same instant. Here was proof that even the most revered authorities could be wrong, that nature herself was the ultimate judge of truth, and that careful observation could reveal principles of motion that had been hidden beneath centuries of philosophical speculation. This revelation was both exhilarating and troubling for the young scholar. If Aristotle could be wrong about falling bodies, what other accepted truths might be false? If the greatest minds of antiquity had been mistaken about such fundamental questions, how could anyone be certain about anything? The young Galileo felt as though he stood at the edge of a vast ocean of unknown knowledge, with only his curiosity and his willingness to observe and experiment as guides through the uncharted waters of discovery. He began to develop what would become his revolutionary approach to understanding the natural world. a method that combined mathematical analysis with careful experimental observation, treating nature as a book to be read rather than a mystery to be contemplated. Financial pressures eventually forced Galileo to leave the university without completing his degree in medicine, much to his father's dismay and concern about the family's future security. But he departed with something far more valuable than a diploma, a method for discovering truth that would eventually transform human understanding of the cosmos. The boy who had questioned everything was ready to become the man who would find answers, not in dusty texts or philosophical arguments, but in the careful study of the natural world itself. He carried with him the seeds of a scientific revolution that would eventually grow to encompass all human knowledge, changing forever the way our species understands its relationship with the universe we inhabit. The years following Galileo's departure from university were marked by financial struggle and intellectual growth in equal measure, a time of hardship that would forge his character and sharpen his resolve to pursue truth wherever it might lead. He returned to his family's home in Florence, where he attempted to make a living as a private tutor of mathematics while pursuing his own investigations into the nature of motion and mechanics. These were lean years, when dinner might consist of bread and olives, and when the cost of paper for his calculations was a significant expense that had to be weighed against other necessities. Yet, in many ways, these years of hardship were among the most formative of his life, for they taught him that the pursuit of knowledge required not just curiosity, but dedication, sacrifice, and an unshakable commitment to truth over comfort. During this period of struggle, Galileo began to develop his revolutionary approach to understanding the natural world, a method that combined mathematical analysis with careful experimental observation in ways that no previous natural philosopher had attempted. He studied the work of Archimedes with the devotion of a monk studying scripture, finding in the ancient Greeks' geometric approach to physical problems a model for his own investigations. Where Aristotle had relied on logical argument and philosophical reasoning to explain natural phenomena, Archimedes had used mathematics to unlock the secrets of leverage, buoyancy, and mechanical advantage. This became Galileo's inspiration and his guide to describe natural phenomena not in terms of their supposed purposes or essences, but in terms of measurable quantities and mathematical relationships that could be tested through experiment and observation. He began to see the universe as a vast mathematical structure, with every motion and interaction governed by precise laws that could be discovered by anyone patient enough to look and skilled enough to understand what they saw. The young scholar spent countless hours in his makeshift laboratory, a converted room in his family's modest house where he conducted experiments with inclined planes, pendulums, and falling bodies. His equipment was crude by modern standards, wooden planks, metal balls, water clocks made from vessels with small holes, but his methods were revolutionary in their systematic approach to understanding motion. He would roll balls down inclined planes of different angles, carefully measuring the distances they traveled in specific intervals of time, searching for the mathematical relationships that governed accelerated motion. Each experiment was repeated dozens of times, with variations in weight, angle, and surface texture, as he sought to isolate the fundamental principles that lay beneath the apparent complexity of moving objects. His notebooks from this period reveal a mind of extraordinary patience and precision, recording measurements and calculations with the meticulous care of a master craftsman. In 1589, Galileo's talents and growing reputation finally earned him recognition in the form of a lectureship in mathematics at the University of Pisa, the same institution he had left without a degree just years before. The salary was modest, barely enough to support himself, let alone help his family with their ongoing financial difficulties, but it provided him with the stability he needed to pursue his research more systematically. More importantly, it gave him access to students who might be inspired to think about the world in new ways, to question rather than simply memorize, to observe rather than merely accept the pronouncements of ancient authorities. His lectures were unlike anything the university had seen before, filled with demonstrations and experiments rather than recitations from classical texts, challenging students to think for themselves about the principles governing motion and mechanics. It was during his time at Pisa that Galileo began to formulate his mature understanding of motion, ideas that would later be refined and expanded in his groundbreaking work on mechanics and his contributions to what would eventually become Newton's laws of physics. He studied the motion of projectiles, discovering that their paths followed predictable mathematical curves, parabolas, rather than the straight lines and sudden changes of direction that Aristotelian physics demanded. A cannonball fired from a fortress wall would trace a smooth arc through the air, its horizontal and vertical motions combining according to precise mathematical rules that could be calculated and predicted. He investigated the properties of inclined planes, finding that they could be used to slow down the motion of falling bodies enough to make careful measurements of their acceleration, revealing the mathematical relationship between distance, time, and the steady increase in speed that characterized all falling objects. Each discovery reinforced his growing conviction that the universe operated according to mathematical laws that could be discovered through patient observation and experimentation, laws that were far more elegant and universal than the complex philosophical explanations that had satisfied previous generations. But it was not only his scientific method that was revolutionary. Galileo was also beginning to glimpse a new picture of the cosmos itself, one that would challenge the most fundamental assumptions about humanity's place in creation. In 1543, more than 20 years before Galileo's birth, a Polish astronomer named Nicolaus Copernicus had published a work called De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium on the revolutions of the celestial spheres, suggesting that the Earth was not the stationary center of the universe, but rather one of several planets orbiting the Sun. This idea, known as the heliocentric theory, had been largely ignored or dismissed by the scholarly establishment, relegated to the status of an interesting mathematical exercise rather than a serious description of physical reality. After all, if the Earth were moving through space at tremendous speed, wouldn't we feel that motion? Wouldn't objects be left behind as the planet hurtled through the void? And what of the biblical passages that seemed to describe a stationary Earth, with the sun rising and setting in its daily journey across the heavens? Yet, as Galileo studied the mathematical details of Copernican theory during his quiet hours away from teaching, he began to see that it offered elegant solutions to problems that had plagued astronomy for centuries. The complicated system of circles upon circles, epicycles, and deferents that astronomers used to account for the complex motions of planets became much simpler if the Sun, rather than the Earth, were placed at the center of the solar system. The strange looping motions that planets sometimes seem to make against the background of stars, what astronomers called retrograde motion, could be explained as natural consequences of viewing their orbits from another moving planet, like the apparent backward motion of a slower car when viewed from a faster one. Most compelling of all, the Copernican system made testable predictions about what observers should see in the heavens, predictions that might be verified or refuted through careful observation, if only someone had the tools necessary to make sufficiently precise measurements. In 1592, Galileo accepted a position at the University of Padua, where he would spend the next 18 years of his life, years that would see him mature from a promising young scholar into one of the most famous natural philosophers in Europe. Padua was part of the Venetian Republic, a place known for its relative intellectual freedom and its openness to new ideas, where scholars could speak more freely about controversial topics than in other parts of Italy. The university itself was one of the most prestigious in Europe, attracting students from across the continent who came to study law, medicine, and natural philosophy under some of the finest minds of the age. Here, Galileo could speak more openly about the possibility that Copernicus had been right about the structure of the cosmos, engaging in debates with colleagues and students who were willing to consider ideas that might have been dangerous to discuss in more conservative environments. The Padua years were marked by both practical innovation and theoretical breakthrough, as Galileo learned to balance the demands of teaching and research with the need to supplement his modest academic salary. To support himself and help his family with their ongoing financial difficulties, he took on private students from wealthy families throughout northern Italy, teaching them mathematics, mechanics, and the practical applications of geometric principles to engineering and military problems. He also established a workshop where he manufactured mathematical instruments, compasses, calculating devices, quadrants, and other tools that were prized by merchants, engineers, navigators, and artillery officers throughout Europe. His workshop became famous throughout Italy for the precision of its instruments and the ingenuity of their design, with orders coming from as far away as Germany and Spain. But even as he worked with his hands, crafting devices from brass and wood with the skill of a master artisan, Galileo's mind was reaching toward the stars, seeking to understand the grand architecture of the universe that surrounded and sustained all earthly concerns. It was during these years that Galileo began to correspond with other scholars who shared his interest in the new astronomy and his conviction that nature could be understood through mathematical analysis and experimental observation. Letters traveled slowly in those days, carried by horseback across the mountains and plains of Europe, but they carried with them the excitement of minds discovering new truths about the world and sharing their insights with kindred spirits. From Germany came news of Johannes Kepler's revolutionary discoveries about the elliptical orbits of planets, mathematical relationships that explained the precise timing of planetary motions with unprecedented accuracy. From Denmark came reports of Tycho Brahe's precise observations of stellar positions and planetary motions, measurements made with instruments of extraordinary precision over decades of patient skywatching. Each letter brought confirmation that Galileo was not alone in his revolutionary vision of the cosmos, that across Europe a new generation of natural philosophers was emerging who shared his commitment to understanding nature through direct observation rather than ancient authority. Yet, for all his theoretical insights and mathematical understanding, Galileo knew that the ultimate test of the Copernican theory would come through observation, through finding ways to see celestial phenomena that had previously been invisible to human perception. If the Earth truly moved around the Sun, then careful observations might reveal evidence of this motion in the form of subtle changes in the apparent positions of stars as viewed from different points in the Earth's orbit. Perhaps the phases of Venus, invisible to the naked eye, would reveal whether that planet orbited the Earth or the Sun, settling once and for all the question of which model of the solar system correctly described reality. Perhaps other planets had moons of their own, as the Copernican theory suggested they might, proving that the Earth was not unique in having a celestial companion. These were questions that could only be answered by looking more carefully at the heavens than any human had ever done before, by finding ways to extend human vision beyond its natural limits. And so Galileo waited and studied and prepared himself for the moment when he would finally have the tools necessary to put his theories to the test. He refined his understanding of optics, studying the behavior of light as it passed through lenses and mirrors, learning the principles that governed the formation of images, and the magnification of distant objects. He perfected his skills as an instrument maker, developing techniques for grinding and polishing glass that would prove essential when the time came to construct the devices that would revolutionize astronomy. He could not have known that this moment was approaching more quickly than he dared to hope, or that it would come in the form of a simple arrangement of lenses that would open up entirely new worlds to human exploration. The boy who had questioned everything was about to become the man who could see everything, and in seeing would change forever humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos that surrounds us all. In the summer of 1609, rumors began to drift across Europe like seeds carried on the wind, whispers of a remarkable new invention that had appeared in the workshops of Dutch spectacle makers, like a gift from the gods of discovery themselves. The Netherlands, with its tradition of fine craftsmanship and its networks of international trade, had become a center for the production of eyeglasses and optical instruments, serving the needs of scholars, merchants, and navigators throughout the continent. Spectacle makers in the Dutch Republic, those patient craftsmen who had spent generations grinding lenses to correct human vision, had discovered something extraordinary while experimenting with different combinations of their curved glass discs. By arranging certain lenses in a tube, separated by precisely calculated distances, they found they could make distant objects appear much closer and clearer than the naked eye could perceive them. Ships on the horizon became visible hours before they would normally appear to watching sailors. Church spires miles away could be examined in detail, their architectural features revealed as clearly as if the observer stood in their shadows. It was as if human sight itself had been enhanced, as if the very limits of perception had been pushed back by an act of ingenuity and carefully shaped glass. The device was called by various names: a spyglass, a perspective tube, or sometimes simply a Dutch telescope, and news of its existence spread with the speed that only truly revolutionary ideas possess. Merchants who had witnessed its capabilities wrote breathless letters to their partners in distant cities, describing the miraculous power to see things that were impossibly far away. Diplomats and travelers carried tales of the wonderful instrument from court to court, sparking intense interest among rulers who immediately grasped its potential military and commercial applications. By late summer, descriptions of the instrument had reached Venice, carried by merchants and travelers who had witnessed its remarkable properties firsthand and could barely contain their excitement about what they had seen. The potential military and commercial applications were immediately obvious to anyone with imagination. Imagine being able to spot enemy ships while they were still beyond the horizon, or to survey distant territories with unprecedented clarity, or to observe the movements of armies across vast landscapes. The rulers of Venice, ever alert to technological innovations that might provide advantages in trade or warfare, were eager to acquire these wonderful new instruments and they were willing to pay handsomely for them. When word of the spyglass reached Galileo in Padua, his response was immediate and decisive, driven by the same curiosity that had compelled him to test Aristotle's theories about falling bodies decades earlier. Here was an invention that combined his expertise in optics, his skill with precision instruments, and his deep curiosity about the nature of light and vision in ways that seemed almost designed for his particular talents. Without waiting to acquire one of the Dutch devices, without even seeing one firsthand, Galileo set about reconstructing the invention based solely on the descriptions he had heard from travelers and the basic principles of optics he had studied in his youth. Working in his cluttered workshop, surrounded by the familiar tools of his trade, grinding wheels, polishing cloths, brass fittings, and wooden tubes, he began the process that would transform both his own life and humanity's understanding of the universe in ways that neither he nor anyone else could have anticipated. The principle behind the spyglass was elegant in its simplicity, though achieving the proper execution required considerable skill, patience, and a deep understanding of how light behaves when it encounters curved surfaces. By placing a concave lens at one end of a tube and a convex lens at the other, with the lenses separated by a carefully calculated distance that depended on their individual focal lengths, it was possible to gather light from distant objects and focus it in such a way that they appeared both closer and magnified to the observer's eye. The concave lens, placed nearest the eye, served to spread out the focused light from the objective lens, creating a magnified image that the eye could perceive and the mind could interpret. The devil, as always, was in the details. The lenses had to be ground to precise specifications, their surfaces polished to perfect smoothness, and their alignment within the tube adjusted with extraordinary care to minimize distortions and maximize clarity. Galileo's first attempts were crude by his later standards, cobbled together from available materials in his workshop, but they worked well enough to demonstrate the remarkable potential of the concept. The distant bell tower of a neighboring church, which had been a familiar sight for years, suddenly revealed details he had never noticed. Individual stones in its construction, the weathering patterns on its surface caused by centuries of rain and wind, even birds perched on its ledges going about their daily business. It was a moment of pure wonder, the kind of experience that reminds us why we became curious about the world in the first place, when the familiar suddenly becomes strange and wonderful again. But even as Galileo marveled at these terrestrial observations, making notes about the clarity and magnification of his primitive instrument, his mind was already reaching toward a more ambitious target that had fascinated him since childhood. Working with the characteristic intensity that had marked all his previous research, Galileo began to refine his design, improving the quality of his lenses and the precision of their mounting with each iteration. He experimented with different types of glass, learning how their optical properties affected the clarity and color fidelity of the images they produced. He developed new techniques for grinding and polishing lens surfaces, creating tools and jigs that allowed him to achieve unprecedented precision in their curvature. He designed mechanical mounts that held the lenses in perfect alignment, while allowing for fine adjustments to optimize the focus and minimize distortions. Each iteration brought better clarity, greater magnification, and wider fields of view, pushing the boundaries of what was optically possible with the materials and techniques available to him. Where the original Dutch spyglasses magnified objects by a factor of 3 or 4, Galileo's instruments eventually achieved magnifications of 8, then 10, then 20 times, with each improvement extending the reach of human perception far beyond its natural limits. By August of 1609, Galileo had produced a telescope, for that is what he called his improved version of the spyglass, from the Greek words meaning far-seeing, that was superior to any instrument then known in Europe. The clarity of its images, the steadiness of its mounting, and the precision of its focusing mechanism represented a quantum leap beyond the simple Dutch prototypes that had inspired his work. When he demonstrated it to the Venetian Senate, climbing to the top of the Campanile of San Marco with a group of dignitaries to show them ships approaching the harbor hours before they would normally be visible, the response was immediate and enthusiastic. Here was a device that could revolutionize navigation, commerce, and military strategy, giving Venice significant advantages over its rivals in the competitive world of Mediterranean trade. The senators voted unanimously to offer Galileo a lifetime appointment at the University of Padua, with a salary double what he had been earning, in exchange for the exclusive rights to produce his improved telescopes for the Venetian Navy. For the first time in his adult life, Galileo found himself financially secure, free to pursue his research without the constant worry about money that had shadowed his earlier years and limited his ability to acquire the materials and equipment he needed for his investigations. But financial security, welcome as it was after years of struggle and uncertainty, paled in comparison to the intellectual possibilities that the telescope opened before him like a door to undiscovered countries. As autumn approached and the nights grew longer, providing more hours of darkness for astronomical observation, Galileo found himself drawn repeatedly to his rooftop, telescope in hand, to explore the celestial realm that had fascinated him since childhood, but which had remained frustratingly inaccessible to detailed study. The moon, which had been nothing more than a bright disk to every human who had ever lived, now revealed itself to be a world of mountains, valleys, and plains, its surface scarred by impacts and shaped by geological processes that suggested a complex history stretching back through unimaginable ages. The Milky Way, that faint band of light that stretches across the night sky, like a river of stars, resolved under his magnification into countless individual points of light, each a sun in its own right, scattered through the depths of space in numbers that defied comprehension. With each night of observation, each new vista revealed by his remarkable instrument, Galileo felt himself standing at the threshold of a new era in human knowledge, poised to answer questions that had puzzled philosophers and astronomers since the beginning of recorded history. The telescope was not just a tool for seeing distant objects more clearly. It was a key that could unlock secrets about the structure of the universe that had been hidden since the beginning of time, waiting for someone with the curiosity to look and the skill to understand what they saw. For the first time in human history, it was possible to test astronomical theories not just through mathematical calculation and philosophical argument, but through direct observation of celestial phenomena that had previously been invisible to human perception. The ancient question of whether the Earth was the center of the universe or merely one planet among many orbiting the Sun could finally be answered through evidence rather than speculation. As the year 1609 drew to a close, with winter approaching and the longest nights of the year providing optimal conditions for astronomical observation, Galileo prepared for the observations that would make him famous throughout Europe and beyond, transforming him from a respected professor of mathematics into one of the most celebrated natural philosophers of his age. He could not have known that he was about to witness sights that would shatter the ancient picture of the cosmos that had guided human thought for thousands of years, and replace it with a vision so revolutionary that it would take centuries for humanity to fully grasp its implications. The boy who had questioned everything was about to become the first human being to see beyond the veil of darkness that had hidden the true nature of the heavens since the dawn of consciousness itself. Standing on his rooftop in Padua, telescope in hand, with the winter stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns, Galileo was poised to take the step that would transform him from a respected scholar into one of the great revolutionaries in the history of human thought. The universe was about to reveal its secrets to the patient observer who had spent his life preparing to receive them, and in that revelation everything would change. Not just for Galileo, but for every human being who would ever afterward look up at the night sky and wonder about their place in the vast cosmos that surrounds us all. The night was January 7th, 1610, and the air above Padua hung crisp and still, as if the universe itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what was about to unfold in the quiet darkness above the sleeping city. Galileo climbed the wooden steps to his rooftop observatory, his feet moving with the careful precision of one who had made this journey countless times before, carrying with him the instruments and notebooks that had become the tools of his nightly communion with the heavens. In his hands, he carried his latest telescope an instrument of his own design that could magnify distant objects by a factor of 20, a feat of optical engineering that no human had achieved before, and that represented months of patient refinement and adjustment. Above him, the winter sky spread out like a dark velvet tapestry studded with diamonds. Each star a distant sun whose light had traveled unimaginable distances to reach his waiting eyes, carrying with it secrets about the nature of the universe that no previous generation had been able to unlock. For months, Galileo had been using his telescope to explore the celestial realm, making discoveries that challenged everything he had been taught about the nature of the heavens and the structure of the cosmos itself. The moon, which philosophers from Aristotle to his own contemporaries had claimed was a perfect smooth sphere of crystalline purity, had revealed itself under his magnification to be a rugged world of mountains and craters, its surface scarred by ancient impacts and shaped by geological forces that could only be guessed at. The lunar landscape was not unlike that of Earth itself, with towering peaks that cast sharp shadows across broad plains, suggesting that the celestial and terrestrial realms were not as fundamentally different as traditional philosophy had maintained. The Milky Way, that faint river of light that flows across the night sky like a cosmic stream, had resolved under his careful observation into countless individual stars, each too distant and faint to be seen with the naked eye, but collectively creating the soft glow that had puzzled astronomers since ancient times and inspiring poets to imagine it as the pathway of souls to the afterlife. Each discovery had been carefully documented in Galileo's notebooks, with precise sketches showing the positions of lunar craters, the phases of the moon's illumination, and the patterns of stars revealed in different regions of the Milky Way. His observational method was as revolutionary as his instruments. Rather than simply describing what he saw in poetic or philosophical terms, he made careful measurements of angles, distances, and brightness, treating the heavens as a laboratory where hypotheses could be tested and theories verified through systematic observation. He timed the appearance and disappearance of lunar features as the moon's phases changed, calculating the heights of mountains from the lengths of their shadows and mapping the lunar surface with unprecedented precision. But on this particular night, Galileo turned his attention to Jupiter, the bright wandering star that had been moving slowly eastward against the background of fixed stars throughout the winter months, following its ancient path through the constellation of Gemini. Through his telescope, Jupiter appeared not as the tiny point of light visible to the naked eye, but as a distinct disk with a perceptible width and a yellowish color that suggested it was a world rather than merely a star. The planet's steady light and lack of the twinkling that characterized true stars had long suggested to astronomers that the wandering stars were fundamentally different from the fixed stars, but Galileo's telescope provided the first direct visual confirmation of this distinction. Yet it was not Jupiter itself that captured Galileo's attention on this historic night. It was what he saw nearby, arranged in the planet's vicinity like tiny attendants at a royal court. 3 tiny points of light, each perfectly star-like, but much fainter than Jupiter itself, lay arranged in a nearly straight line, 2 on one side of the planet and 1 on the other, aligned as precisely as if they had been placed there by the hand of a cosmic architect. At first, Galileo assumed these were simply background stars that happened to lie in the same direction as Jupiter when viewed from Earth, mere coincidences of perspective that meant nothing in terms of the actual relationships between celestial objects. The universe was full of such apparent alignments, chance arrangements that looked meaningful to Earth-based observers, but which revealed nothing about the true structure of the cosmos. After all, the constellation patterns that had guided navigation and inspired mythology for millennia were themselves nothing more than accidents of perspective, with stars at vastly different distances appearing to form meaningful shapes when viewed from our particular location in space. But something about the perfect alignment of these 3 points of light troubled him, some instinct born of years of careful observation that suggested he was seeing something more significant than a chance arrangement of unrelated objects. He made careful notes of their positions relative to Jupiter and to each other, sketching what he saw with the meticulous attention to detail that characterized all his scientific work, measuring angles and estimating distances with the precision tools he had developed for astronomical observation. The next night, January 8th, Galileo returned to his rooftop with eager anticipation, expecting to find Jupiter had moved eastward relative to the background stars, as planets always did in their slow wandering across the celestial sphere. What he found instead was something that made him question his own observations and wonder if his eyes or his instruments had somehow deceived him the night before. Jupiter had indeed moved, following its predictable path against the stellar background, but now all 3 of the small points of light lay to the west of the planet, still aligned in a nearly straight line, but in a completely different arrangement than the night before. If these were background stars, as he had initially assumed, they should have maintained their positions relative to each other while Jupiter moved past them. Had he made an error in his previous observation, perhaps confusing one star for another in the crowded field of view? Had clouds or atmospheric distortions somehow deceived his eye, creating illusions where none existed? 5. The careful astronomer in him demanded verification, and he resolved to continue his observations until the mystery was solved. The 3rd night brought clouds that obscured Jupiter from view, leaving Galileo to pace his study in frustration while winter storms swept across northern Italy, hiding the heavens behind veils of moisture and mist. But January 10th dawned clear and cold, promising excellent conditions for astronomical observation once the sun had set and the sky had darkened sufficiently for telescopic work. When Galileo turned his instrument toward Jupiter that night, What he saw convinced him beyond any doubt that he was witnessing something unprecedented in the history of human observation. Now, only two of the tiny points of light were visible, both on the eastern side of Jupiter, while the third had vanished completely, presumably hidden behind the planet itself or lost in its glare, suggesting that these objects were much closer to Jupiter than background stars could possibly be. Night after night, throughout the remainder of January and into February, Galileo returned to observe Jupiter and its mysterious companions with the dedication of a monk attending prayers. Each evening brought a new configuration that told a story of celestial mechanics unlike anything previously recorded in the annals of astronomy. Sometimes 2 points of light appeared on one side and one on the other, sometimes 3 on one side and none on the other. Sometimes only 2 points were visible, while the third had vanished entirely, presumably hidden behind Jupiter itself or lost in the planet's overwhelming glare. Gradually, as the nights passed and the patterns became clearer, Galileo began to discern the individual motions of what he realized were separate objects, each following its own path around the giant planet with mathematical precision. Slowly, inevitably, the only possible explanation began to emerge in Galileo's mind with the force of revealed truth. These were not background stars at all, but objects that orbited Jupiter just as the moon orbited the Earth, creating a miniature solar system that operated according to the same principles that Copernicus had proposed for the larger cosmos. The implications of this discovery were staggering and revolutionary in ways that extended far beyond astronomy into the very foundations of human philosophy and theology. For 2,000 years, philosophers and astronomers had assumed that the Earth was unique in having a moon, that our planet stood at the center of all celestial motion as the focus of divine attention and cosmic purpose. The idea that other worlds might have their own satellites had never seriously been considered, for it challenged the fundamental assumption that all heavenly motion must center on the Earth and its human inhabitants. If Jupiter could have moons, and Galileo eventually identified 4 distinct satellites in orbit around the giant planet, then the Earth was not unique, not the sole focus of celestial mechanics, but merely one world among many, in a universe far more complex and interesting than anyone had previously imagined. Yet here was direct observational evidence that Jupiter, itself merely a planet orbiting the Sun according to Copernican theory, had its own family of moons, a miniature planetary system that operated according to universal principles of motion and gravitation. As the weeks passed, and Galileo's observations revealed the complexity and regularity of the Jovian system, he began to understand that he was witnessing a cosmic clockwork of extraordinary precision and beauty. The innermost moon, which he would later name Io, completed its orbit around Jupiter in less than 2 days, racing around the giant planet with a speed that dazzled him and suggested immense gravitational forces at work. The second moon, Europa, took about 3.5 days to complete its circuit, moving with stately grace through its larger orbit. The third moon, Ganymede, required about 7 days for each revolution, while the outermost moon, Callisto, took more than 2 weeks to complete its journey around Jupiter, moving with the measured pace of a cosmic timepiece designed by a master craftsman. Each moon followed its own path with mathematical regularity that could be predicted and verified through continued observation, their motions governed by laws that were clearly universal in scope and application. Here was proof that the principles Kepler had discovered in studying planetary orbits applied not just to the planets themselves, but to entire families of worlds throughout the universe, suggesting a cosmos governed by consistent physical laws rather than divine whim or Aristotelian purpose. But the moons of Jupiter, remarkable as they were, represented only the beginning of what Galileo would discover in those transformative months of early 1610, when the telescope first revealed the true complexity of the solar system. Turning his instrument toward Venus, the brilliant morning and evening star that had puzzled astronomers with its variable brightness and its restricted elongations from the sun, he observed something that provided decisive evidence for the Copernican theory of the solar system. Like the moon, Venus showed phases, sometimes appearing as a thin crescent when viewed through the telescope, sometimes as a half-disk, sometimes as a gibbous shape, and occasionally nearly full when it passed on the far side of the sun from Earth's perspective. In the traditional Earth-centered model of the universe, Venus was supposed to orbit between the Earth and the Sun, which meant it should have shown only crescent phases, never appearing more than half illuminated when viewed from Earth. But the full range of phases that Galileo observed could only be explained if Venus orbited the Sun rather than the Earth, sometimes appearing beyond the Sun from Earth's perspective, and sometimes between the Sun and Earth, its changing phases revealing its changing position in its solar orbit, just as the Moon's phases revealed its changing position relative to the Sun and Earth. Each discovery built upon the last, creating an overwhelming case for the revolutionary new picture of the cosmos that Copernicus had proposed more than half a century earlier, and that Galileo was now able to confirm through direct observation rather than mathematical theory alone. The Earth was not the motionless center of creation around which all celestial objects revolved in complex patterns designed to serve human purposes, but rather one world among many, orbiting a star that was itself merely one of countless suns scattered throughout the infinite depths of space. Humanity's cosmic significance was not diminished by this revelation, Galileo realized, but rather enhanced, for we were apparently the only beings known to be capable of understanding the magnificent architecture of the universe we inhabited, the only creatures able to build instruments that could reveal the hidden structure of reality and minds, capable of comprehending the mathematical laws that governed the cosmic dance. The universe was far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had previously imagined, filled with worlds and systems of worlds, each operating according to the same fundamental principles, but expressing them in endlessly varied and beautiful ways. Throughout these months of discovery, Galileo worked with feverish intensity, observing whenever the weather permitted, sketching what he saw with an artist's eye for detail, and recording his observations with the precision of a master craftsman who understood that he was documenting phenomena of historic importance. He understood intuitively that he was witnessing sights that no human had ever seen before, that he was gathering evidence that would revolutionize humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos and challenge assumptions that had guided human thought for millennia. The weight of this responsibility both exhilarated and sobered him. He was not merely making routine astronomical observations, but participating in the expansion of human consciousness itself, opening new chapters in the great book of natural knowledge that future generations would build upon and extend. Each clear night brought new wonders, new confirmations of the Copernican worldview, new evidence that the universe was governed by mathematical laws that could be discovered and understood through patient observation and careful reasoning. As spring approached and the constellation patterns shifted with the changing seasons, Galileo prepared to share his discoveries with the world, knowing that they would challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality and humanity's place within it. He had seen wonders beyond imagination, had witnessed the birth of a new science that would transform humanity's relationship with the universe for all future generations. The boy who had questioned everything had become the man who had found answers among the stars, answers that would echo through the centuries and inspire countless future explorers to push ever further into the cosmic unknown in search of new truths about the nature of existence itself. The night heaven had opened its eyes through Galileo's patient observation, and through his remarkable telescope, humanity had learned to see with a new and revolutionary clarity that would forever change our understanding of the cosmos and our place within its vast and magnificent structure. In March of 1610, as spring returned to northern Italy and brought with it the promise of renewal and new beginnings, Galileo published a small book that would transform the world's understanding of the cosmos and secure his place among the greatest figures in the history of human thought and discovery. He called it Sidereus Nuncius, the Starry Messenger, and in its pages he shared with the world the wonders he had discovered through his telescope during those remarkable winter months when the heavens had first revealed their hidden secrets to human eyes. Written in elegant Latin prose that combined the precision of scientific description with the wonder of poetic revelation, The book described his observations of the moon's mountainous surface, the resolution of the Milky Way into countless individual stars, and most dramatically, the discovery of the 4 moons of Jupiter, which he diplomatically named the Medicean stars in honor of Cosimo de' Medici, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, whose patronage he hoped to secure for his continued research. The book was brief, only 24 pages, but it contained enough revolutionary content to overturn centuries of astronomical theory and philosophical assumption about the structure of the universe and humanity's place within it. The impact of the starry messenger was immediate and profound, spreading across Europe with the speed of wildfire and igniting debates that would rage for generations. Within weeks of its publication, copies had reached Paris, London, Prague, and other major intellectual centers carried by merchants, diplomats, and scholars who recognized that they were witnessing the dawn of a new age in human understanding. Some readers were amazed and inspired by Galileo's discoveries, seeing in them proof of humanity's ability to unlock the secrets of nature through patient observation, ingenious instrumentation, and careful reasoning rather than reliance on ancient authority or philosophical speculation. Others were deeply troubled by the implications, recognizing that these observations challenged fundamental assumptions about the structure of the universe and humanity's privileged place within it, threatening worldviews that had provided meaning and comfort for countless generations. The book became a catalyst for intellectual revolution, dividing the scholarly community between those who embraced the new astronomy with its promise of endless discovery and those who clung to ancient certainties that had seemed so secure before Galileo's telescope revealed the true complexity of the heavens. The moons of Jupiter, in particular, captured the imagination of educated Europeans in a way that surprised even Galileo himself, becoming symbols of a new relationship between humanity and the cosmos. Here was tangible proof that the Earth was not unique in possessing a satellite, that other worlds in the solar system had their own complex systems of celestial mechanics operating according to the same mathematical principles that governed terrestrial phenomena. If Jupiter could have moons, astronomers reasoned, might not other planets as well? And if the universe contained multiple planetary systems, each with its own family of worlds, might not some of those distant orbs harbor life of their own, perhaps even intelligence capable of building telescopes and making discoveries about the structure of their own cosmic neighborhood? 5. Questions that had been purely philosophical and speculative suddenly became matters for scientific investigation, opening up vistas of inquiry that would occupy astronomers and natural philosophers for centuries to come, and fundamentally changing humanity's conception of its place in the cosmic order. But the consequences of Galileo's discoveries extended far beyond astronomy into every field of human knowledge, creating ripples of change that would eventually transform the entire structure of learning and investigation. By demonstrating that human ingenuity could reveal previously invisible aspects of reality, the telescope became a symbol of the power of the scientific method itself, showing that nature's secrets could be unlocked through the combination of careful observation, mathematical analysis, and instrumental enhancement of human senses. No longer would scholars need to rely solely on ancient authorities and logical argument to understand the natural world. They could build instruments, make observations, conduct experiments, and test their theories against the evidence of their own enhanced senses. The telescope was the first of what would become a vast arsenal of scientific instruments, each designed to extend human perception beyond its natural limits and reveal new layers of reality hidden from everyday experience, from microscopes that would reveal the world of the infinitely small, to spectroscopes that would decode the chemical composition of distant stars. The success of the starry messenger brought Galileo fame throughout Europe and beyond, making him one of the most celebrated intellectuals of his age. But it also brought him into increasingly dangerous conflict with those who saw his discoveries as threats to established religious and philosophical doctrine. If the earth was not the center of the universe, some theologians argued, then humanity could not be the central focus of God's creation, the special objects of divine attention and care that Christian doctrine had always proclaimed them to be. If the moon was not a perfect sphere of crystalline purity but a rugged world like the earth, scarred by impacts and shaped by geological processes, then perhaps the traditional distinction between the corrupt earthly realm and the perfect heavens was not as absolute as had been believed for centuries. If the stars of the Milky Way were actually suns like our own, scattered through unimaginable depths of space, then the universe was far larger and more complex than biblical cosmology seemed to allow, challenging fundamental assumptions about the scale and purpose of creation itself. These were not merely academic questions debated in university halls, but challenges to a worldview that had guided European thought for more than a millennium and provided the intellectual foundation for religious faith, political authority, and social order. The growing controversy reached a critical point in 1616, when the Roman Catholic Church officially condemned the Copernican theory as false and contrary to Holy Scripture, placing Copernicus's work on the index of forbidden books and instructing Galileo not to hold or defend the idea that the earth moved around the sun. For a time, Galileo complied with this directive, at least publicly, turning his attention to other aspects of his research that seemed less threatening to religious orthodoxy: the study of motion and mechanics, the properties of materials, the behavior of fluids, and the development of new mathematical techniques for analyzing physical phenomena. But the evidence he had gathered through his telescope continued to weigh on his mind like an unfinished symphony, and he could not bring himself to abandon the truth he had discovered among the stars, even when that truth brought him into conflict with the most powerful institution in European society. He continued his astronomical observations in private, documenting the behavior of Jupiter's moons, tracking the phases of Venus, and studying the rotation of the Sun as revealed by the motion of sunspots across its surface, gathering ever more evidence for the Copernican worldview that official doctrine required him to reject. In 1632, after years of careful preparation and political maneuvering, Galileo published what would prove to be his masterwork, the Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, a brilliant exposition of the arguments for and against the Copernican theory presented in the form of conversations between three characters representing different philosophical positions. Though written ostensibly as a neutral examination of competing theories, the book made a compelling and ultimately devastating case for the heliocentric model of the solar system, drawing on all the observational evidence Galileo had accumulated over more than 2 decades of telescopic research, as well as his theoretical insights into the nature of motion and mechanics. The dialogue format allowed Galileo to present controversial ideas while maintaining a thin veneer of objectivity, letting the evidence speak for itself while avoiding direct confrontation with church doctrine. Or so he hoped. The book was written in Italian rather than Latin, making it accessible to educated readers throughout Europe rather than restricting it to university scholars, and it quickly became one of the most widely read scientific works of the 17th century. But the book's success was also its downfall, for its clear advocacy of Copernican theory could not be disguised behind literary devices, and it brought Galileo into direct conflict with the church authorities who had warned him against promoting such ideas. In 1633, at the age of 69, Galileo was brought before the Roman Inquisition and forced to recant his belief that the earth moved around the sun, kneeling before the assembled cardinals and formally denying the conclusions that his lifetime of observation and reasoning had led him to embrace. Legend has it that after formally denying the motion of the earth, he muttered under his breath, "Eppur si muove," and yet it moves, though this story is almost certainly apocryphal, a romantic invention that better captures the spirit of scientific truth than the historical reality of an old man's humiliation. What is certain is that Galileo spent his final years under house arrest at his villa outside Florence, forbidden to publish or teach his astronomical theories, but continuing his research into the fundamental principles of motion and mechanics that would later inspire Newton's revolutionary synthesis of terrestrial and celestial physics. Even in confinement, the old astronomer's mind remained active and curious, working on problems of engineering and mathematics, training his telescope on the moon and planets whenever his failing eyesight permitted, and dictating his final thoughts about the nature of motion to students and secretaries who preserved his insights for future generations. Yet even as Galileo faced persecution for his ideas, the revolution he had begun continued to spread throughout Europe and beyond, carried forward by other astronomers and natural philosophers who had access to telescopes and the courage to use them in service of truth rather than comfortable illusion. Other observers confirmed his discoveries about Jupiter's moons, Venus's phases, and the complex surface of the moon, adding observations of their own that extended and refined the new picture of the solar system. The moons of Jupiter became regular subjects of study, their orbits mapped with increasing precision as better telescopes and more systematic observational techniques revealed the mathematical laws governing their celestial dance. Saturn revealed its mysterious appendages, what Galileo had seen as strange handles or ears on either side of the planet were eventually recognized as rings, though early telescopes lacked the resolution to show them clearly as the magnificent system of ice and rock particles that modern instruments have revealed. The Sun itself, when viewed through properly darkened lenses to protect observers' eyes, showed dark spots that moved across its surface in patterns that provided evidence of solar rotation and suggested that even the source of all light and warmth was not the perfect, unchanging sphere that ancient philosophy had demanded, but a dynamic, active world with its own complex behavior and structure. As the decades passed and the telescope evolved from Galileo's simple arrangement of lenses into increasingly sophisticated instruments capable of revealing ever finer details of the cosmic landscape, the revolution in astronomical knowledge accelerated beyond what any single lifetime could encompass. Larger objective lenses gathered more light, allowing astronomers to see fainter objects and resolve smaller features than had ever been visible before, pushing the boundaries of the observable universe ever further into the depths of space and time. Better optical designs, reduced chromatic and spherical aberration, improving the clarity and color fidelity of telescopic images and making possible more precise measurements of planetary positions, stellar brightnesses, and the subtle details of lunar and planetary surfaces. Mechanical improvements made telescopes easier to aim and track celestial objects as they moved across the sky due to Earth's rotation, enabling longer observations and more systematic studies of variable phenomena like eclipses, occultations, and the changing configurations of planetary systems. Each advance in instrumental capability opened new frontiers for exploration and discovery, revealing layers of cosmic complexity that no previous generation had imagined, and posing new questions about the nature, origin, and ultimate fate of the universe itself. The intellectual courage that Galileo had shown in trusting his observations over ancient authority became a model for natural philosophers throughout Europe and eventually the entire world, inspiring a transformation in how humanity approached the study of nature that continues to this day. The Royal Society of London, founded in 1660 to promote what its members called experimental philosophy, adopted as its motto nullius in verba, take nobody's word for it, a direct reflection of Galileo's insistence that nature herself must be the final arbiter of truth, not the pronouncements of ancient authorities or the comfortable assumptions of traditional belief. The scientific method that he had helped to pioneer, combining mathematical analysis with careful observation, controlled experimentation, and the systematic testing of hypotheses against empirical evidence, became the foundation of modern science, transforming humanity's relationship with the natural world in ways that continue to unfold and surprise us with each new generation of discovery. Universities throughout Europe began to establish observatories and laboratories where students could learn to make their own observations and conduct their own experiments rather than simply memorizing the conclusions of ancient texts, creating a new kind of education based on direct engagement with natural phenomena rather than passive reception of received wisdom. When Galileo died on January 8, 1642, nearly blind from a lifetime of looking at the sun and stars, but with his mind still active and curious about the workings of the natural world, he could not have foreseen the full extent of the revolution he had initiated or imagined how far his simple telescope would eventually carry human understanding. Within a generation, Isaac Newton would use Galileo's insights about motion and mechanics, combined with Kepler's laws of planetary motion and his own mathematical innovations, to formulate the universal law of gravitation that showed the same force causing apples to fall from trees also held the planets in their orbits around the sun and the moons in their orbits around the planets. Within 2 centuries, astronomers would discover that the sun itself was merely one star among billions in a vast galaxy called the Milky Way, and that countless other galaxies filled the depths of space beyond our own, each containing billions of stars and presumably countless worlds where the story of cosmic evolution might be playing out in ways we are only beginning to imagine. Within 3 centuries, spacecraft would visit the moons of Jupiter that Galileo had discovered with his primitive telescope, revealing them to be worlds of breathtaking complexity and beauty. Io with its sulfurous volcanoes powered by tidal heating, Europa with its hidden ocean that might harbor life, Ganymede with its magnetic field and layered structure, and Callisto with its ancient cratered surface that preserves the record of the solar system's violent youth. Today, as we prepare for sleep under the same stars that Galileo observed 4 centuries ago, we can reflect on the profound transformation that began with his simple arrangement of lenses and his willingness to trust what his enhanced eyes revealed about the nature of reality. The universe he showed us is far stranger and more wonderful than anything the ancients had imagined. A cosmos of billions of galaxies, each containing billions of stars, many of which we now know have planets of their own orbiting in the habitable zones where liquid water and perhaps life itself might exist. Some of those distant worlds may indeed harbor life, perhaps even intelligence, capable of building their own telescopes and making their own discoveries about the magnificent structure of the universe we all share. Radio telescopes scan the skies for signals from other civilizations, while space telescopes search for Earth-like planets around other stars, continuing the quest for cosmic understanding that Galileo began when he first turned his telescope toward the heavens and saw wonders that no human had ever witnessed before. The boy from Pisa who questioned everything grew into the man who showed us that the universe is both larger and more knowable than we had dared to hope, more complex than our ancestors could have imagined, but still comprehensible to minds willing to observe patiently and reason carefully about what they see. His telescope did more than magnify distant objects. It magnified human possibility itself, showing us that with patient observation, careful reasoning, and the courage to challenge accepted wisdom, we could unlock secrets that had been hidden since the beginning of time and discover truths about the nature of reality that no amount of philosophical speculation could have revealed. In teaching us to see beyond the limits of our natural vision, Galileo taught us to see beyond the limits of our inherited assumptions about the nature of existence, opening our minds to possibilities that continue to unfold with each new generation of scientific discovery. The revolution he began continues today in ways both subtle and profound, as new instruments and new techniques reveal ever deeper layers of cosmic structure and behavior, challenging our theories and forcing us to revise our understanding of space, time, matter, energy, and the fundamental forces that shape the universe at every scale from the subatomic to the galactic. The 4 small points of light that he first noticed near Jupiter on that winter night in 1610 have become symbols of discovery itself, reminders that the universe is full of wonders waiting to be revealed to those who have the end and 45 curiosity to look and the patience to understand what they see. Each moon follows its ancient orbit with the precision of a cosmic clockwork, just as they did when Galileo first glimpsed them through his handmade telescope, but now we know them as complex worlds in their own right, with their own stories to tell about the formation and evolution of the solar system. What Galileo saw as tiny points of light dancing around Jupiter, we now recognize as dynamic, active worlds that continue to surprise and delight us with each new mission of exploration. geologically active moons with subsurface oceans, magnetic fields, and perhaps even the conditions necessary for life to emerge and evolve in environments utterly unlike anything found on Earth. The telescope that began as a simple tool for making distant ships visible from harbors has become humanity's most powerful means of exploring the cosmos, with giant instruments perched on mountaintops and orbiting in the vacuum of space that peer deeper into the universe than Galileo could have imagined, revealing the birth and death of stars, the collision of galaxies, the expansion of space itself, and perhaps even glimpses of the ultimate origin and fate of everything that exists. Yet, for all our technological sophistication and theoretical understanding, we remain connected to that first moment when Galileo raised his telescope to the night sky and saw wonders that no human had ever witnessed before, experiencing the pure joy of discovery that lies at the heart of all scientific endeavor. Every time an amateur astronomer sets up a small telescope in their backyard and shows a child the rings of Saturn or the moons of Jupiter for the first time, they are recreating that fundamental experience of wonder and revelation that changed Galileo's life and ultimately transformed human civilization. Every time a professional astronomer discovers a new planet orbiting a distant star, or detects gravitational waves from colliding black holes, or captures images of galaxies forming in the early universe, they are extending the journey that began when Galileo first realized that the Earth was not alone in having companions in its cosmic dance. The spirit of inquiry that drove him to question accepted wisdom and seek truth through direct observation continues to inspire new generations of explorers who push ever further into the cosmic unknown, armed with instruments that would seem like magic to Galileo, but guided by the same fundamental commitment to understanding the natural world through careful observation and rigorous reasoning. The revolution that Galileo began continues today in ways both subtle and profound, as our understanding of the universe continues to evolve with each new observation that challenges our theories and forces us to revise our concepts of space, time, matter, and energy. Just as Galileo's telescope revealed that the universe was far larger and more complex than anyone had imagined, modern instruments are revealing new layers of cosmic structure and behavior that demand new ways of thinking about the fundamental nature of reality itself. We have discovered that the universe is not only expanding, but accelerating in its expansion, driven by a mysterious dark energy that comprises most of the cosmos, but remains completely invisible to our instruments. We have found that most of the matter in the universe consists of dark matter that interacts gravitationally but cannot be seen directly, creating the scaffolding upon which galaxies and galaxy clusters are built, but revealing itself only through its gravitational effects on visible matter. We have detected ripples in space-time itself, gravitational waves produced by the collision of black holes and neutron stars, confirming Einstein's predictions about the fundamental nature of gravity and opening entirely new windows for exploring the most extreme phenomena in the universe. Perhaps most importantly, Galileo's legacy lives on in the spirit of inquiry that he embodied, the willingness to question established beliefs, to observe carefully and systematically, to test ideas against evidence, and to follow that evidence wherever it may lead, regardless of how uncomfortable or challenging the journey might be. In an age when information travels at the speed of light and new discoveries are announced almost daily through global networks of communication, we still need the patience, care, and intellectual courage that characterized Galileo's approach to understanding the natural world. The universe may be vast and complex beyond our current ability to comprehend fully, but it remains fundamentally knowable to minds willing to observe with care, reason with precision, and remain open to possibilities that may challenge our most cherished assumptions about the nature of existence itself. Each new generation of scientists stands on the shoulders of those who came before, extending the reach of human knowledge into previously unexplored realms of space and time, matter and energy, life and consciousness, building upon the foundation that Galileo laid when he first turned his telescope toward the heavens and saw that reality was far more wonderful than anyone had dared to dream. The great observatories of our time, both ground-based telescopes with mirrors the size of houses and space telescopes orbiting far above Earth's atmosphere, continue Galileo's work of revealing previously invisible aspects of the cosmos with ever greater clarity and precision. The Hubble Space Telescope has shown us galaxies forming in the early universe, nebulae where new stars are being born from clouds of gas and dust, and planets orbiting other stars in systems that might harbor conditions suitable for life as we know it. Radio telescopes have revealed pulsars spinning hundreds of times per second, quasars powered by supermassive black holes, billions of times more massive than our Sun, and the faint afterglow of the Big Bang itself, still echoing through space after nearly 14 billion years of cosmic expansion. Infrared telescopes peer through cosmic dust to see the hidden processes of star formation and planetary evolution, while X-ray telescopes reveal the violent phenomena associated with black holes, neutron stars, and the collision of galaxies across the vast reaches of intergalactic space. Yet, despite all our technological advances and theoretical sophistication, the fundamental questions that drove Galileo's curiosity remain as compelling and mysterious as ever, perhaps even more so now that we understand how vast and complex the universe truly is. Are we alone in the cosmos? Or does life exist on other worlds orbiting other stars in our galaxy and beyond? How did the universe begin, and what will be its ultimate fate as it continues to expand and evolve over cosmic time, 0, 5, What is the nature of consciousness, and how does the arrangement of matter in our brains give rise to the subjective experience of being aware, of wondering, of seeking to understand our place in the larger scheme of existence? These questions, which would have fascinated Galileo as much as they fascinate us today, continue to drive scientific research and philosophical inquiry, reminding us that the journey of discovery he began is far from complete and may indeed have no end. Only an endless unfolding of ever deeper mysteries and ever more wonderful revelations about the nature of reality. As we drift towards sleep in our beds tonight, we can imagine Galileo on his rooftop in Padua 4 centuries ago, carefully adjusting his telescope and recording his observations in the flickering light of a candle, unaware that he was taking the first steps on a journey that would transform humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. In that simple scene lies the essence of the scientific enterprise that continues to this day. One curious mind, armed with the tools of observation and reason, reaching out to touch the infinite mystery that surrounds us all, and finding that with patience and skill, that mystery can be gradually understood, one discovery at a time. The stars that shone down on Galileo as he made his revolutionary observations are the same stars that shine down on us tonight, and they still hold secrets waiting to be discovered by future generations of explorers who will build ever more powerful instruments and develop ever more sophisticated theories to decode the messages written in starlight across the vast expanses of space and time. The universe that Galileo revealed to be so much larger than anyone had imagined remains inexhaustibly rich with wonders yet to be found, questions yet to be answered, and possibilities yet to be explored by minds curious enough to ask and patient enough to listen for the answers that nature provides to those who know how to look and how to interpret what they see. His discovery that Jupiter had moons opened our eyes to the possibility that planetary systems might be common throughout the universe, a possibility that has been spectacularly confirmed by modern planet-hunting telescopes that have detected thousands of worlds orbiting other stars, some of them possibly harboring conditions suitable for life as we understand it. His observation that the Milky Way consisted of countless individual stars suggested that the universe might be far larger than anyone had imagined, a suggestion that has been vindicated beyond his wildest dreams by the discovery that our galaxy is only one among billions of galaxies scattered throughout observable space, each containing billions of stars and presumably countless worlds, where the cosmic story continues to unfold in ways we are only beginning to glimpse. In our dreams tonight, we might find ourselves standing beside that great pioneer of human knowledge, sharing his sense of wonder at the magnificent cosmos that his simple telescope first revealed in all its unexpected glory and complexity. We might feel the same thrill of discovery that he experienced when he first realized that the tiny points of light near Jupiter were actually moons, worlds in their own right, orbiting a distant planet according to the same mathematical laws that governed the motion of our own moon around Earth. We might share his quiet satisfaction at having answered questions that had puzzled humanity since the beginning of consciousness, and his excitement at discovering that each answer opened up new questions even more fascinating and profound than the ones that came before. We might sense the deep connection between his work and our own continuing efforts to understand the universe, recognizing that every astronomer who peers through a telescope today, every physicist who studies the fundamental forces of nature, every biologist who searches for life beyond Earth, is continuing the journey of discovery that began when one curious Italian professor first turned a simple arrangement of lenses toward the night sky and saw that reality was far more wonderful than anyone had ever dared to imagine. The boy who questioned everything became the man who showed us that the universe itself is the greatest question of all, not because it cannot be answered, but because every answer reveals new depths of mystery and beauty that call us to continue the eternal journey of discovery that defines our species at its best. Galileo's telescope was more than an instrument of observation. It was a bridge between the human desire to understand and the cosmic reality waiting to be understood, a tool that connected the curiosity of one individual mind with the vast intelligence that seems to be written into the structure of the universe itself. In crossing that bridge, he transformed not only our knowledge of the heavens, but our understanding of what it means to be human in a universe far stranger and more magnificent than our ancestors ever dared to dream, showing us that we are not passive observers of a clockwork cosmos, but active participants in an ongoing process of cosmic self-discovery that may be the universe's way of coming to understand itself through the evolution, consciousness, and intelligence. And so we sleep, cradled by the same cosmic forces that held Galileo in their gentle embrace 4 centuries ago, dreaming perhaps of distant worlds and the secrets they hold, confident that the journey of discovery he began will continue as long as curious minds look up at the night sky and wonder about the magnificent mystery that surrounds us all. In the morning, the stars will fade into the blue brightness of day, but they will still be there, waiting patiently for the next generation of explorers to extend their vision beyond the horizon of the known and venture once again into the boundless realm of cosmic possibility that Galileo first opened to human exploration. The eternal echo of his first glimpse through that primitive telescope continues to resonate through the centuries, reminding us that the universe is both our greatest teacher and our most inspiring challenge, forever calling us to see more clearly, think more deeply, and dream more boldly than we ever thought possible. As we close our eyes and surrender to sleep, we carry with us the knowledge that we are part of a story that began long before Galileo's birth and will continue long after our own time has passed. A story of minds awakening to the beauty and complexity of existence, and finding in that awakening both humility and wonder, both questions and answers, both the satisfaction of understanding and the excitement of mysteries yet to be solved by future generations of cosmic explorers who will carry forward the light that Galileo first kindled when he dared to look beyond the veil of darkness and see the universe as it really is, vast, ancient, dynamic, and inexhaustibly beautiful in its endless creativity and its patient willingness to reveal its secrets to any mind curious enough to ask the right questions and skilled enough to understand the answers written in the language of mathematics across the star-scattered depths of space and time.